The ground cracked beneath bare feet thirsting for rain that would never come. Yellowed grasses rustled dryly and under a relentless wind, and the sky above the canyons burned in shades of bronze. For weeks, not a single drop hadn't fallen. The land was waiting, restless, brittle, hungry for flame. Ella May had grown used to the silence. Her cabin sat at the edge of the pine line, a small and hand-built shelter nestled against the shadows of the vast Wyoming forest, 10 mi from the nearest town, 5 mi from any neighbor, and surrounded by nothing but the wild. It was her choice. Silence was safer than people, and isolation was easier than trust. She was 24, a widow and a mother. Jonah, not yet a year old, and had just fallen asleep on her chest. She rocked him in a worn wooden chair by the window, whispering the old lullaby her and husband used to sing, her voice cracking on the final note. That was when the thunder began. Deep, distant, and dry, and lightning cracked open the sky, silent at first, then a sudden blast like a gunshot. The air shimmered. Ella paused, looking up. The smell hit before and the sound did. Smoke. She stood, heart racing. The baby stirred. A second flash and of lightning lit the ridge line above the tree line to the north. Moments later, a faint orange glow bloomed in the distance, small but growing fast. Ella moved quickly. She soaked a rag in the last of the wash water and pressed it gently over Jonah's face. Her fingers trembled. She threw open the small wooden chest at the foot of her bed, grabbed a blanket, and doused it with what little remained in the basin. The wind screamed through the trees. The fire was coming down the slope like a stampede. She wrapped Jonah tight, held him to her chest, and burst out the cabin door. The world outside had turned red. "Come on," she whispered, more to herself than the baby. Her bare feet thudded against the hard earth as she ran, breath shallow, eyes wide. Sparks danced on the wind like angry fireflies. Trees cracked and groaned as flames leapt from limb to limb. She aimed for the creek to the east. If she could reach it, maybe. But the fire had already cut her off. The smoke was too thick. Ella coughed, staggered nearly, dropped the baby. Her vision swam. She spun around only to see flames curling around the path she had just taken. The cabin was gone, just ashes and memory, and now a wall of fire blocked every direction. She stumbled toward a single tree, one still wet, with sap tucked low against the earth. She collapsed at its base, pulling the blanket tighter over Jonah. His cries were muffled but frantic. "I am sorry," she whispered, rocking him. "I am so sorry." The heat pressed against her back. Her lungs burned. She closed her eyes, clutched her baby close, waited. Then came the thunder of hooves, not from the storm, but from the earth. Through the smoke a black horse burst into view, muscles wild and foaming. Upon its back rode a man dressed in ash and sweat, his coat singed at the edges, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. Rowan Carter. He did not shout, he did not slow. He rode straight through the fire. In one swift movement, he pulled the blanket from his saddlebag, soaked it in his canteen, wrapped it around Ella and Jonah. She barely had time to gasp before he had scooped them both up with a grunt of effort. "Lifting them across the saddle, hold on to me," he barked. She obeyed with one hand around her and the other gripping the reins. Rowan turned the horse sharply. The fire roared ahead, a curtain of orange and black. He dug his heels into the stallion's side. "Go!" The horse screamed as it charged. They galloped through the blaze. Sparks singed Ella's hair. The smoke tore at her eyes, but Rowan's body shielded them. His shirt caught fire at the shoulder. He did not flinch. The flames opened before them like the maw of hell. And then light, fresh air, night sky, the scent of burned pine fading behind. They had made it through. Ella sobbed into his chest. Jonah whimpered. Rowan said nothing, only held the reins rode straight into the darkness. Ella woke to the scent of wild sage and something faintly floral. Her eyes blinked open, for a moment she thought she had died. The bed beneath her was softer than anything she had ever known. The linens white as snow, sunlight filtered through gauzy curtains that moved gently in the morning breeze. Then came the sound, faint breathing. She turned quickly. Jonah lay in a cradle next to the bed, wrapped in a cotton quilt. His tiny hand was bandaged, but he slept soundly and peacefully. A woman in a tan apron sat nearby, dabbing a cool cloth to Ella's forehead. "You're safe now, ma'am," the woman said kindly. "You both are." Ella's heart raced. She pushed herself upright, wincing at the ache in her limbs. Her last memory was fire and roaring, devouring, and a man on a horse breaking through it. Where am I?" she asked. "Carter Ranch," the woman replied. "You've been asleep for 2 days. Ella threw off the covers and sat up. The room swayed, then steadied. Her throat burned. "I need to go. I cannot stay." Before the woman could answer, and footsteps echoed in the hall. The door opened. Rowan Carter. He was taller than and she remembered. His dark hair damp, as if he had just scrubbed away the ash. A faint burn mark curled at the edge of his collarbone, barely visible above his clean white shirt. His eyes found hers steady, unreadable. "You're awake," he said. Ella opened her mouth, then shuttered it. The man radiated calm, but there was something about him that made her chest tighten. "You brought us here," she said. "You needed shelter," Rowan replied. He stepped closer, glanced at Jonah, then knelt beside the cradle. His large and calloused hand hovered just above the boy's chest, never touching, just feeling the rise and fall of breath. "And how is he?" Ella asked quickly. "He will heal," Rowan said. "The doctor says, and no lasting harm." Ella exhaled, tension loosening from her spine. "I shouldn't leave," she said. "We should not impose." Rowan stood. "You will stay until the child is well." Ella narrowed her eyes. "You do not know us." He studied her. "You and the woman who ran into fire for her son. That tells me enough." His tone allowed no argument, and yet it was not harsh. She sat back down. "Why did you help us?" He turned toward the window. "I was not going to let a child die because the sky forgot how to rain." Then he walked out, boots echoing on the floorboards. The woman in the apron returned quietly, offering a cup of tea, and Ella took it, dazed. She had not even thanked him. She was not sure she could, and she spent the rest of the morning staring out the window. Rolling hills stretched far and golden. Fences ran across the land like stitched seams. Pastures full of grazing horses. In the distance stood a barn bigger than any she had seen in her life. This was not a ranch, it was a kingdom. Rowan Carter, she would later learn, had once been a hired gun in the border wars. Then, like a man punishing himself through ambition, he had bought every piece of dead land no one else wanted and made it bloom. 60,000 acres, no wife, no child, no known kin. The town called him a man who needed no one, and yet he had carried her through fire. Ella did not understand it. She did not trust it. But as she looked at her son, safe and warm, and she felt something stir. Not gratitude, not yet. Something deeper, something waiting. Days passed quietly, like dust settling after a storm. Ella had an expected awkwardness. Rowan Carter was a man of silence. He did not linger, ask questions or crowd, but he never disappeared. Each morning he checked Jonah's bandage himself, hands rough but careful. Each evening, he left a picture of boiled water by her door. Not a word, just presence. One afternoon, she found him on the back porch, seated on the wooden steps with Jonah asleep on his chest. The baby's breath rose and fell, and with Rowan's. His hand patted the boy's back gently like a silent lullaby. When Ella approached, he did not look up. He would not settle. Thought he might like the open air. She nodded, though he could not see her. She stood there a long moment, watching the man who had once walked through fire now cradle her and son like something sacred. Later that week, Rowan rode into town without a word. He returned by sunset, dust on his shoulders. Ella expected tools or supplies. Instead, he placed a small wooden horse on Jonah's cradle and hand-carved with a crooked painted smile. He left before she could thank him. Ella began noticing things. Her back had been aching from long hours at the stove. The next morning, a rocking stool appeared near the fireplace. The kettle handle had been replaced with one easier to grip. The pantry had been rearranged so she would not need to stretch. He never said a word. Then one night, as early snow crept over the hills, Ella woke chilled, her body aching, her throat burned. A fever had taken hold. When she opened her eyes, Rowan was beside her. He had entered without knocking and carrying a steaming mug and a folded cloth. He pressed the cloth to her forehead, knelt beside the bed, and handed her the tea. Herbal, bitter, perfect. You should have said something, and he murmured. Her voice cracked. I did not want to trouble anyone. He looked at her. Really looked. You are not trouble, he said. The simplicity of it and made her breath catch. He stayed that night, sitting in the chair beside her, and Jonah slept soundly nearby. The firelight bathed the room in soft gold. They did not speak, but something passed between them, quiet, undeniable. A truth and words could only ruin. In her fevered haze, Ella watched his silhouette and felt something stir in her chest softly, painfully, unmistakably. She noticed how and often his eyes found hers across the room. How he shifted slightly when she entered. How his hands, though scarred, and moved with care around Jonah. How he never touched her, but always stood just and close enough for her to feel him. She began to wonder if she was not just a guest, not just a burden, not someone being forgotten or replaced until the end drawer. She had been looking for thread, just a needle and twine to mend Jonah's blanket. The drawer in Rowan's study was slightly ajar. She opened it. Inside was a letter. The paper was yellowed, sealed with red wax, addressed in an elegant looping script. Rowan, I will wait for you in San Francisco. Love never ends. Ella froze. Her fingers trembled. Love never ends. Her heart beat and thundered in her ears. She closed the drawer slowly, then packed. She folded Jonah's things with care, tucked the blanket into her satchel, placed the carved horse on the hearth beside the fire. She left no note, did not wake anyone. With Jonah in her arms, she stepped into the night, the wind biting her cheeks, and did not look back. Rain hammered the roof of the great house like 1,000 fists. Inside the study, shadows danced across maps, leather-bound books, and oil paintings of rivers and ranges Rowan Carter had once tamed. The hearth burned low, barely holding against the storm outside. Rowan sat in the high-backed chair near the window, a glass of untouched whiskey in his hand, and in front of him, on the corner of the desk, sat a faded photograph in a silver frame, its edges dulled by time, a woman smiling, hair pinned back, eyes full of belief. Olivia. He stared at her image in silence, the storm flickering across her glass-covered face. I never thought I'd feel this again, he murmured, voice. Not since you. He set the glass down, leaned forward, and whispered to the photograph. For the first time in years, I wanted something real, and I pushed her away. He closed his eyes. The memories came like a flood. He had been a younger man, proud and dangerous, and fighting for pay along the borderlands where land barons clashed with tribal nations. He was good with a rifle and better with silence. Then came Olivia, daughter of a Kansas preacher, stubborn and as winter and kind as spring. She had kissed him behind the mission's chapel and told him if he lived through one last campaign, she would marry him under the cottonwoods. But he had enemies. One night, while Rowan was out chasing pay, the vengeance found her first. They burned the church with her inside. He buried her in Kansas soil and never spoke her name again until now. After that, he disappeared from the wars and bought land no one wanted, raised horses, not hell, built fences instead of breaking through them, and lived alone, punishing himself in silence. And until Ella May, until the fire, a knock came at the door. One of the house staff stood soaked in the hall, rain dripping from his hat. She's gone, sir. Rowan turned slowly. Gone. She left in the night with the boy. The man handed him a folded note. No more than a scrap. I do not belong here. Rowan stood, fingers clenched. For years nothing had touched him. Not time, not grief, not mercy. But now he felt something tear open inside his chest, sharp, irregular. He moved fast, saddled his horse himself, packed only what he needed. A rope, flint, and lantern, and the letter she had found, the one never meant to be read. The rain came harder as he rode. He tracked wagon prints through the forest path up into the mountains. The trees blurred with water. The wind howled through the rocks, but he did not stop. He knew where she had gone. The old burn site, place scorched by the fire, where blackened trunks still stood like mourners. a place no one visited, but she would. Ella had once mentioned a pearl necklace, her late husband's gift to Jonah before the baby was born. She had lost it in the flight from the flames, and now she was trying to get it back. By the time Rowan reached the ridge, lightning split the sky. The trail below was slick with mud. Hoof and prints mixed with boot marks veered sharply near the cliff edge. Then he saw her. Ella was below, clinging to a root, half submerged in a rushing gully. Water roared down the ravine, rising fast. Her eyes were wild with fear. Jonah's safe, and she screamed. I left him in the wagon. Rowan did not wait. He tied a rope to his saddle horn, wrapped the other end around his waist, and plunged down the rocks. Rain blinded him. His boots slipped. The world tilted, but he reached her. Take my hand, he shouted, and she did. The current dragged at them both, but Rowan braced himself, gripping at a jagged stone with one hand and pulling her up with the other. Inch by inch, her fingers dug into his arm, nails scraping skin, until at last he dragged her over the edge. They collapsed together on the bank. Ella coughed, shivering violently, and mud clung to her dress, her hair stuck to her cheeks. She reached for him as if to say something, but no words came. Neither spoke. They just held each other, and in the rain, two people soaked to the soul, and for once the silence between them was not empty. It was full. The letter arrived just after dusk. It was not addressed to Rowan. It was for Ella. She opened it with trembling hands, eyes darting across the jagged handwriting. If Carter wants the boy back, he'll hand over the southern fields. We both know what he really cares about. Come alone or not at all. CM. Ella's breath caught in her throat. Jonah gone, taken. The last thing she remembered was stepping into the clinic in town just to fetch cough syrup. A moment, a glance away, and when she turned back, his blanket lay empty on the bench. She rode back to the ranch as fast as the horse would carry her. When Rowan read the note, he said nothing at first, just stood there and staring out the window toward the horizon where his land stretched endlessly. Finally, he spoke calm as death. Clay Mortensen. Ella froze. You know him. He tried to undercut me on the rail line contracts. Lost blames me for his debts. But Jonah, he's using the boy to get my land. Then call the sheriff. Rowan turned to her slowly. His voice dropped. Mortensen owns half the deputies in 3 counties. If we call on them, Jonah will vanish. Ella's knees nearly gave out. What are we supposed to do? Rowan looked at her long and steady. Then, for the first time, he took her hand. Rough fingers, steady grip. I am going to get him back. He left the next morning before dawn. No farewell, no promises, just action. He packed only what mattered. His revolver, a hunting rifle, a folded map of the valley, and a small leather pouch from the drawer beside Olivia's photo. Inside was a weathered charm, half moon and eagle and feathers. Olivia's. He tucked it into his shirt. Clay Mortensen's hideout was an abandoned ranch deep in the southern basin, cut off by bluffs and rarely visited. Rowan knew the terrain. He had scouted it once in another life. He camped a mile out, waited for nightfall. And then he set fire to a stack of brush south of the compound, thick smoke curling upward into the stars. As the unhired guns scrambled toward the glow, Rowan circled wide, approaching from the west, using shadows and sagebrush for cover. He moved like a ghost. 2 guards stood near the barn. Rowan knocked one out cold with the butt of his rifle, shot the other clean through the thigh and before the man could draw. Inside the barn was dark. Rowan heard soft crying and small, muffled Jonah. He found the boy tied in a horse stall, a dirty blanket thrown over him. Rowan knelt quickly, cutting the bindings. Jonah whimpered, but the moment he saw Rowan's face, he stilled. I've got you, Rowan whispered, hoisting the child close. Then shouts. Footsteps pounded outside. Rowan ducked low, moved fast, pressed against the barn wall. He fired once through a crack in the wood, hitting a lantern plunging the yard into smoke and darkness. The man cursed firing wildly. Rowan bolted through the rear door. Jonah clutched tight. He weaved through brush, zigzagging, using every trick he had learned on the battlefield. But a shot rang out from behind. It struck. Pain bloomed in his shoulder, his knees buckled, but he never let go of the child. He rolled behind a fallen log, breathing hard, shielding Jonah with his body. The baby sobbed softly against his chest. Footsteps approached. Another shot cracked overhead, then out of the dark, and a bell, a clang, then a roar. The blacksmith, old Jed, the town's retired forger, charged into the chaos with his wagon team, and a lantern in each hand. And behind him came two of the ranch hands from Carter's spread, alerted by Ella, and who had ridden out in desperation. After Rowan left, the distraction worked, and Mortenson's men scattered, caught off guard by the sudden force. Rowan was hauled up, bleeding but conscious. They brought him back under cover of night, and Ella waited on the porch, lantern trembling in her grip. When she saw Jonah safe and Rowan half unconscious, covered in mud and blood, she dropped to her knees, sobbing. They carried him inside, laid him on the bed. He drifted in and out of consciousness, and before he passed out entirely, Ella pressed a damp cloth to his brow and whispered, "You brought my son home." And Rowan opened one eye, managed the faintest of smiles. "I told you," he murmured, fingers brushing against the charm still at his neck, blood staining the edges. "I do not let children die." And the storm outside howled like a wounded beast, snow lashing the window panes and with relentless force. But inside the small room at Carter Ranch, time stood still. Rowan lay unmoving, his face pale, his breathing shallow. The bullet had missed his heart, but not by much. Fever now gripped him, fierce and unrelenting. Ella had not left his side in 3 days. She refused food, refused rest. She sat quietly, holding his hand when the tremors came, wiping sweat from his brow when he murmured in delirium. Sometimes he called for Olivia. Once he whispered Jonah's name, but mostly he lay silent. Ella told stories to Jonah, and while cradling him with one arm, her other hand never far from Rowan's. Her voice cracked, but she smiled when the boy looked up. "Do you know what kind of man he is?" she whispered, brushing Jonah's hair. "The kind who walked through fire to save you twice." That night, certain she might lose him, she wrote him a letter, folded it, left it beside the bed. "Rowan, I used to think I was broken, that love like this wasn't meant for people like me. But you made me believe again. Even if I lose you, I will carry this with me like flame. It will never go out. Ella." At dawn on the 4th day, Rowan stirred. Ella snapped awake at the soft shift of breath. She leaned in, clutching his hand. His eyelids fluttered open. He looked at her, not with warmth but something else. His gaze was distant and his expression guarded. "Rowan," she whispered. "You're awake." He blinked, and "Jonah." "He's safe," she replied quickly. "Perfect, waiting for you." Rowan nodded weakly, then turned his head toward the window. Snow fell beyond the glass, and silence stretched between them. Ella brushed a lock of damp hair from his temple. "You scared me. I did not mean to," he said. Then after a pause, "You should go." Her chest tightened. "What?" And his voice was, "You and the boy deserve better than this. Better than me. I am not whole. Rowan, I cannot give you a future, Ella. Only ghosts, only regrets." And he closed his eyes. "Leave before I am strong enough to stop you." She stared at him, stunned. By nightfall she packed, not because she wanted to, but because he asked her to. Jonah slept peacefully as she strapped the bag. She looked back only once at the man who had risked everything for her. Now bathed in fire light silence. Then she stepped out into the wind. Snow blanketed the hills cloaking the land in white stillness. Ella rode toward town, the storm biting at her cheeks. Rowan's words echoed in her mind. "You should go." But halfway down the trail, something inside her shattered. No man had ever fought for her like he had. No one had ever risked their life for her child. And no man, no matter how broken, deserved to be left alone after giving everything. She turned the horse around. Snow whipped across her face. Her cloak soaked through. Still, she rode, heart pounding, hooves lost in white. When she burst through the ranch door, she did not call for help. She moved through the hall like a storm herself, wet and breathless, trembling. Rowan's eyes opened as she entered. She dropped her bag, crossed the room, fell to her knees beside the bed wrapped her arms around him. He stared at her, stunned. "You came back," he whispered. "I never and left," she said. She pulled back enough to look him in the eye. "You do not get and to choose for me. I choose." Her palm pressed against his chest over his and battered but beating heart. "And even if you think you are too broken to love," and her voice cracked, "I am not too broken to stay. I do not want perfect, Rowan. I want real." A beat of silence. "I choose now. I choose you." The snow melted, and slowly that year, softening the frozen ground like forgiveness. Ella stayed, and not because Rowan asked, but because he stopped pushing her away. In the quiet days that followed the storm, they found a rhythm. He healed slowly. She helped rebuild what fire, bullets, and fear had and tried to take. But it was what Rowan did in secret that changed everything. He met with a lawyer one morning, long before the sun rose. Documents were drawn up, signatures placed. By week's end, a portion of Carter Ranch and thousands of acres to the east was legally hers. No ceremony, no